live.
Okay. Welcome and thanks for your patience as we resolve a few technical difficulties. I'm Yael Cassandra, the City of Bloomington Communications Director, and I'm joined here today for this Facebook Live Town Hall with Bloomington Mayor John Hamilton, also Deputy Mayor Mick Renison, and Administrative Coordinator Morgan Wells. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's budget season, and that's what we like to call, or another name for that is priority setting time here at the city. So we're going to be spending the next 45 minutes or so talking about the process of creating the budget, setting our priorities with the mayor, the deputy mayor, and Morgan. So we hope you'll join in the conversation, take the opportunity to pose questions via the comments section on Facebook, and share your concerns about city budgeting. So we'll try to address your inquiries over the course of the next hour. So as you know, if you've been reading the newspaper, the heads of the city departments have been making their 2019 budget presentations. They did that during the week of August 20th. Since then, the Common Council has been considering their proposals for next year's budget, talking about it, and then we'll be voting. They will be voting on it September 26th, that's this Wednesday, for the first time, and then again on October 10th. If you've been following this process over the last few years, you'll see a difference in the way the process has been going, the way it looks, and the way it's conceived from previous years. So there's been an evolution in the budget document, and so we thought it would be useful to showcase that and also showcase the thinking that undergirds that shift. And not only useful, but also transparent, which is a big priority. Mayor Hamilton, if there's one thing we hear around here, it's your adage about how the budget is the primary policy document. So maybe you could share with us what you mean by that.
Well, sure. Thank you, Yael. And it is a little trepidation, scary to have a budget Facebook Live presentation. I mean, budgets are pretty dry often. They're very technical in many ways, but they really are the most important single document where we as a community decide how to invest our resources, what our priorities are, how they change. And as you'll see, I think, talking today, we're also really trying to make this budget process and document evolve into something more accessible to people and accountable and transparent. So the budget allocates $150 million a year, and it decides as a community what we're going to pay for and what we're going to buy and what priorities we have. So it's a very important thing. It is pretty dry, and that's what we're trying to get around, is trying to get it more accessible to people.
Well, the budget itself might seem dry, but in fact what we're talking about is accomplishing huge things. So I think that's why we're doing this, is trying to talk about the activities that underlie this document.
Yeah, and a phrase I use is, stealing from Dr. Seuss, I guess a little bit, is that in government, I think one of the things we're supposed to do is say what we will do, that is outline what it is we intend to do, that's in the budget, and then do what we say, do what we said we'll do, and that goes to evaluating and measuring and reporting on what we've done. And so that's, I know, part of what we want to do today too, is look at 2017 back and what we did.
Right, and I think that talking about the transformation of the way we do this budget bears a little bit of explanation and is actually pretty interesting. So Mick, you could speak to that transformation with a great deal of authority. You were the longtime head of the Department of Parks and Recreation, and so you've seen that transformation from in concept and in appearance of the way goals are established and implemented.
Right, so as the Parks and Recreation Director, in my experience, we used to start with doing a community survey. And that community survey was done once every 5 years. It was statistically valid, and it kind of helped frame that next 5-year cycle for what the important things that our department, Parks at that time, were charged to do based on community feedback. Now, all of our departments now in the new role that I'm in, of course, have things that repeat annually. We're gonna plow streets every year, we're gonna do sidewalk repairs every year, we're gonna have certain programs that are repeated annually, but then there's always the new elements and the things that sometimes your community tells you that you might not have thought about. And I'll give you an example. In Parks, my first experience with our survey in '96 revealed that the number one thing that people in our community wanted were trails. It was not on any of our radar at all in the department. And thankfully, we were smart enough to listen to our community. And from that point since, trail construction connections have been the priority, the number one priority out of that every 5-year survey. Mayor Hamilton was good enough to broaden the survey approach to doing it completely citywide, which had never been done before in my 38 years of municipal government experience, to find out what the community thought about how, in our first year in the administrations, whether or not we were doing the things that our community wanted us to do. So we did our first one in 2017, we'll do another one in 2019, and the mayor will talk about that a bit more. So in my evolution of doing budget development in Parks, we've come full circle back to what we now call activity-based budgeting. And it's really looking at what is it, the service that you provide in each respective department, and how much time does that take, how many resources does that take, both people, human resources, and pieces of equipment and supplies and all the things that are required to provide that service to the community. And figuring out how many people utilize that, how many road miles you pave, how many parks you offer, and how many people attend those events at parks or at community and family resources events and so forth, and seeing what we spend on those. So that's a real transparent way of saying, here's your public dollars at work, what are they doing, and how many people are utilizing or benefiting from those services. So that's kind of a snapshot of moving from a more line-by-line budget that just says, here's how much we're gonna spend, to here's how much we're gonna spend on an actual service that's delivered, and how many people and resources it takes to deliver that service.
Yeah, well, I might just add too, I think there's an old phrase I remember in government where people used to say, don't put a number and a date in the same sentence in government, because you'll just get in trouble if you do that, because you may not make it. Well, that's a cynical way to think about government, and it's the opposite. I think that what government needs to do is say, here's what we intend to do, by when. Now, we don't always get it done. Government's not perfect. Government tries to do things. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But so one change was trying to be really clear about how many street miles we wanted to get done, how many swimming lessons did we want to give, you know, how many tons of trash were we planning to pick up, and then similarly to hold accountability to that, and then to make it really transparent with this activity-based budgeting. Say, well, how much are you going to spend offering those swimming lessons overall? How much are you going to spend each year compared to ice skating lessons or picking up trash? How much do you spend each year on those activities rather than the bureaucratic structure we had before?
Yeah, so it takes a certain amount of courage to put those numbers out and to acknowledge publicly that this is what our goal is, and then furthermore, a year later to say, and here's how far we got toward them.
Right, and that's what we're doing now. You know, since I came in 16, the first budget we got to do was 17, and that's what we're now releasing today is the report, about 100 pages of goals from 17 and how we did. And I would be the first one to say, look, this is a work in progress. They weren't perfect. It was trying to walk and then run, and we're still getting there, but to set out all these goals and then see how we did.
Right, and I want to remind our viewers that you can see that document online if you go to bloomington.in.gov/city/budget. Let's, in just a moment, we're going to talk about some of the other tools we've used to transform the way goals are set. But if I could just summarize what we've said so far, I guess, Nick and the mayor, you've been talking about the way that goals started getting more specific and measurable, this idea of SMART goals.
So I'm going to let Morgan, our administrative coordinator and in the office, well known as the Trello wizard, talk about what SMART goals are, and then I'll come back and mention how we arrived at the goals that the public can now see online through a process called strategic planning.
Yeah, so SMART goals are goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. So basically, that all just means that they aren't just words, they're things that you can read and you can hold people accountable to those goals. No.
So there was because of a strategic planning initiative that was happening in 2016, soon after you came in, there was more of a formulation of goals for each department, as I understand. And then in 2017, with that budget, things started to, or I should say for the 2018 budget, the metrics started to really come in. And then for this year's budget, we implemented, or we started using a new tool that Morgan is also well acquainted with. You may have heard Mick call her the Trello Wizard. This is a project management software that we decided to implement to track progress even more effectively. Maybe we could talk about Trello.
Yeah, I'd also like to go back to how strategic planning led to the goal setting that we started with in the first Hamilton administration budget, which really wasn't until 17. So we inherited the 16 budget, and then you craft your next budget. So we met with all of the department heads, and we just talked about what are the initiatives going on that you have to repeat that are your basic core services, and then determine what are the things you like to do based on the feedback you get from the community. The survey was one of the tools we used. We had that document in hand when we created the 17 and 18 budget goals. And then what else, what other methodologies do our department heads use to find out critical path issues that our residents would like to see us do. So we did that in a series of strategic planning sessions that we held with our department heads, and out of that came our first iteration of the goals that we set for the 17 budget process. When you see the report, we want your feedback. We know it's not perfect, as the mayor said. We think the 18 goals we set got better, and now we're working on 19. They'll get even better yet. And that's my experience says that's what happens when you implement something new and as comprehensive of a change as it was. It's taken some time to bring everybody up to speed. Some departments are going to naturally have a little bit easier time having metric-driven goals because they have activities that you can measure, and then some are going to struggle. And that's what we've experienced in our process steps here. So Trello is really a software tool that the innovation director researched and found a way to use as a way to help manage it. You could use an Excel spreadsheet. That's what we used to do in parks. But this tool is a little more dynamic. We'll show you a screenshot here in a second. It kind of gives you a sense for its robustness. The document you're seeing online, if you go to the website and look at it, is really a downloaded Excel sheet out of the Trello page, and that's what you can see now on the screen. This is the actual tool of what it looks like, actively updated by as many as 30 or more people in the organization that are putting in real-time updates as things happen. It's a management tool that the department heads are using.
Yeah, we can almost think about it as an ongoing to-do list, and that each department is keeping track of. You can check and see what other departments are doing, and then as you go along, you can track your progress, you can check off what you've done. And so the idea is, as you mentioned, Nick, this dynamic tool that comes of great use when it comes to budget time, and you report out of this software into an Excel spreadsheet.
And I would also say, I think the goal is to really encourage people to look at these goals that are set by department, each agency, and some of them collaborative goals, and understand what they are and see how we're doing on those. And they range, there's 100 pages of them, which is a lot. But if there are areas that you're interested in, you may find that particularly appealing. But it's meant to this budget is a priority document, and these goals are what we're buying with the budget, and working with council to articulate, just using the parks example, which we've done, or maybe another one would be the animal shelter, and let's look at how many adoptions they're getting done, and what's the euthanasia rate, and how's that changing, and what's the goal was 2017 goal to do various things, and how did it go? And this really lets us look at that, not only internally to help evaluate how we're doing, but externally for the public to be able to see, oh, well, that's what the animal shelter, those are their key goals this last year. How did they do? Exceeded some and they didn't, and we may be looking at some. It's always scary when you're in the government to say, well, here's some goals we didn't meet, because that's, well, somebody would say you didn't meet this goal, so you failed. Well, I think we have to avoid thinking about it that way. We're never gonna, if we set goals that we meet every one of them, then we didn't set goals that are hard enough to get to. And so, we're gonna see some places where we said, hey, I'm gonna try this, and it didn't quite happen.
Yeah, so it involves us all stretching a little bit.
Yeah.
But at the same time, sometimes when goals aren't met, it's the indication of a larger trend or larger forces at work. Maybe there's not as much demand for something, and so, for example, people are using a different service. There's not as much demand for this particular service, and so in the next year's budget, you're going to do some course correction.
Well, you had that all the time in parks, right?
Right.
People would like this sport more now than 10 years ago, or vice versa.
We call that a life cycle analysis. You're essentially looking at trends over time, participation trends. Are people participating in team sports or individual sports? Are they more inclined to do a formal activity or an informal activity? And trail use you monitor over time too, just to see what kind of activity level there is, because that's where you know where the trends are moving upward. You want to invest your resources. And the hard part for government is often to get out of some things that you see the trend line going down, but you're still spending the same amount of money on it. And that's difficult, but over time, when you look at it from this kind of with a lens like this, you're more likely to make the decisions based on where the resources should be spent, not just because you've always done it and you should repeat it because you've always done it. So taking a look at those life cycle trends are really important. And Trello, the tool, helps us manage that.
And again, if you're just tuning in, we're talking budget today with Mayor John Hamilton, Deputy Mayor Mick Renison, and Administrative Coordinator Morgan Wells. And we're talking about the budget, of course, because we're in the midst of the approval process for the 2019 budget. We think this is an apt time to reflect on where we've come, the different ways that we're setting the budget now, the different process we're using, and to show you how we've managed to achieve some of the goals through public spending. So we're showcasing a couple of documents, one today and one I think will be available tomorrow on our website. The 2017 budget goals and accomplishments is on our website currently. You can track our progress at bloomington.in.gov/city/budget. This might be a good time to get a little granular and look at some of those individual budgets. How did we do? Maybe we could start with the fire department.
It's always fun to start with the fire department.
Why not?
And I think Morgan can also let us know as you're teeing that up. Morgan's been helping assemble this, and would it be fair to say that it's been a process of back and forth with department heads? Not simple. It's kind of a new thing.
There are always difficulties when you start using a new tool, but I think as we move forward, people will really start to buy in that this is a good way to hold our departments accountable in a very transparent way. And I really hope the public will, even though it's 100 pages, scroll through, especially the departments that you're particularly interested in. We can keep doing this from here on out.
I think philosophically too, when you ask department heads in our case, or any organization out there that folks in the audience are affiliated with, to do something different, to do something that requires you to get into a document and keep it updated on a regular basis, that's a change in culture. Fair to say that the change in culture here has been met with some pushback, which is normal when you make a big change like that, but we do think it's really important, as Morgan mentioned, about the accountability of this, and quite frankly, once you start to use it as it's intended, then you know better when to start making decisions in real time, because you have the data that tells you it's time to get out of that service or spend less on that service, or there's something else that's really emerging that we need to pay attention to.
So this had one interesting example to me, which is this bottom one, which I can't read, but is in the fire department to test a hybrid service delivery model. And what that's a bunch of words that really mean our fire department sends out, most of what we respond to are medical calls, where people are hurt, injured, fall, etc. and we send fire engines to those calls, which are big and heavy and expensive. And we wanted to try a hybrid service delivery model, which meant create an SUV, basically a smaller vehicle, that 2 firefighters can jump in, hit out quickly to medical emergencies when it's not a fire call. And to try that out in 2017 was the first year they really did that. And this Trello, this report shows that they had a 35% reduction in medical emergency response times with that model. You'll see in 18 that we're pursuing this model, and that anyway, that was one particular goal in connection with emergency operations to try, and this report's on that. And if you're in the public, it also lets you see that. And if you're interested, you can call up and say, hey, I want to know more about that. How's that working?
Yeah, and if you take a look at that document on our website, you can see that we're using a few different terms as far as evaluating the progress toward those goals. For 2017, you'll be able to determine whether a goal was accomplished.
That's my favorite.
Okay, yeah, well,
that's
and all the rest you can just ignore. No, there are a couple that we indicate as substantially accomplished. That means accomplished by more than 50% of the goal. Not met means that a budget goal was not met, less than 50% stated. There aren't very many of those, of course. In progress is another term we're using, working toward accomplishing that goal, and inactive means that goal is sort of like an NA, it's no longer applicable.
I do want to clarify, in progress and inactive are only used for the 2018 updates. So after we publish that tomorrow, that's where you'll start to see those status labels.
Right.
Because that means 2018 we're going to show halfway through the year where we are. We didn't do that in 17. 17 we're doing year's over. It's clear the year's over, so let's see where we are on that. And then 2018 we're going to do halfway through where we are, which helps everybody see that.
It might be helpful too to note, and we'll show an example of this in a minute in the mayor's office budget, that some projects or work product transcends any one budget year. Any one of the 4 string of pearls would be examples of that. So we'll show you in a second some of those examples, but the Switchyard Park obviously has had a horizon of a decade or more, and we're fortunate enough now that it's being constructed and it will open, but it won't open until 2019, and we're in 2018. Significant steps have been accomplished in 17 to get through the design process, 18 to get it bid and construction starting, and 19 for completion. But there were steps before that and after that will carry on in the Switchyard Park's timeline that transcend budget years into many budget cycles.
And I think this one shows that 17 we were supposed to get the design done and the specifications created in order to tee up for 18 to do the bidding, which we got done. So that was good. We collectively, and that was exciting to see. What's some other examples we want to do?
Well, some of our goals have to do with equipment. Others have to do with, a lot of them have to do with people. Just going back to the fire department budget, the increasing firefighter safety by committing to OSHA and National Fire Protection Association compliance was a goal for 2017 that was accomplished, and we can see exactly how much was done. They did an audit, made recommendations, and identified violations and corrected them, and then put others in the 2018 budget. So those kinds of things too, so increasing safety and compliance and training. We could go...
Human resources maybe, or would that be one to think? One of the things when I came in was really looking at how we're doing developing our most important resource, which is our people, our 700 people. And one of the things we hadn't done was do performance evaluations in a regular way. And most of anybody who's in a significant organization knows if you have to give performance feedback to people to help people improve. All of us need that. And so one of the goals in 17 was to do annual performance evaluations, to begin that, which we hadn't done for quite a while, I found. And so that was done in 2017 and accomplished, and we've now, you'll see it in 18 and 19 because it's a way of life now for us.
I think another important element noted in the human resources document that you see before you is increasing overall, the organization, the city as a whole's commitment to training and developing staff. And so the mayor mentioned in the 2017 budget development process, I'd like to see us try to get to 1% of the city's budget dedicated to developing professional development for all of the city staff that work, all of the 700 employees, and many more seasonals that also are benefit from that kind of training. So that was another goal that was set and accomplished in 2017.
We started from 0.5%, so we really doubled it. And I think actually this year we're up to
1.5%.
1.5%. So we've tripled it since coming in, and that's a good thing anyway. And this lets us track that and make sure we're doing what we say we do.
Right, and more in a more than anecdotal way. And some of these goals have not only been met, but really surpassed. Increased participation of our employees in our wellness program from 15 to 25% was one of the HR goals. And it turns out over 30% of the employees participated. And so it's really gratifying to see that and really useful that we have this document.
And let me just make a comment. You know, Morgan, you said SMART goals. They need to be the right goals because we have to pick the right goals. And that's a place where obviously City Council, but the public too can weigh in and say, I don't think that's the right goal. I think you ought to measure it this way or look at this. And this is a constantly evolving thing, and getting feedback from people, many of whom are experienced with these kinds of goal setting, can be helpful to us. It's always scary for government to do it because we're public and we do something wrong, people will criticize, which is perfectly appropriate. But that's how we get better. And so encouraging people to look and see what you think of these goals and see how they ought to be improved because they're going to change every year.
Again, that's bloomington.in.gov/city/budget. And we do have a few mechanisms that we've mentioned already to incorporate that public input. We have the city survey that happened in 2017 and again in 2019. This year too, there's another interesting aspect in the proposed 2019 budget, Mayor, having to do with participatory budgeting. So that's where a segment of our residents will actually get to make a determination about public spending. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So this is an idea that's been used around the country in various places. It's kind of like direct democracy. It's like pushing some money out directly to the people, if you will, either by neighborhood or other groups, to say, here's some money, how do you want to spend it? And obviously most of the budget isn't done that way. We have elected people and the council reviews it and we do it, but this has proven effective in some places to engage people in different ways. And we proposed it in the 17 budget for neighborhood-based participatory budgeting, but didn't get any takers from council representatives. So this year, and really patterned after Boston, which has done this in a great way, we've proposed a small piece of the budget for youth, kind of maybe junior high to high school age youth, to have a slice of the budget and say, what do you think we should do with this money in the city? And have a process by which they can allocate a modest amount of money, $10,000, $20,000 for projects that they think are important. It helps allocate money, but more importantly, probably, it helps people grab hold of government, realize this belongs to us, it belongs to me, I can be part of this. It increases voting participation, it increases from evidence of other places. So I hope we'll try that out. So if you're young out there between junior high and high school, look forward to investing a little of the city money next year, we hope.
Well, we do have input, direct input right now from someone who's watching. And so this is a question that comes up from time to time. It has to do with consultants. Sometimes people wonder why we use consultants. So Joel is wondering about that in terms of our spending. Why do we continue to spend money on outside consultants who give us the same information we already have on hand? And Joel chastises us, saying you need to be better stewards of our tax dollars.
So I'll give a quick reaction. A good question, and others may jump in. Nobody, I think, has a fundamental goal of let's use more consultants. City government does a lot of things regularly, but consultants are often brought in for a couple reasons. One, because we have a big bump of activity that's going to be temporal, short-lived, short period of time. And if we hired permanent people to do that, we'd have to lay them off or get rid of them after that project's done. So some of it is you need to expand your efforts. For example, we're gonna be doing Switchyard Park, and we need help designing that. Well, we don't design a $30+ million park every year.
Right.
Another reason would be because it's special expertise that we don't have on staff, and we need to bring that in. An example would be, we need to inspect a garage for engineering issues, and we want the experts. We want somebody who really knows garages, an expert in that, to come in and help us. But it's always a good question to evaluate that, and we look at it every day.
Yeah, I think the mayor gave some great examples. Others would be the time sensitivity of a particular project. We may have the skill set, but not the bandwidth to get that project accomplished, or that piece of work for a project accomplished in the time frame we have it. So you supplement your staff with that outside expertise to accelerate it. It's often the reason that you hire a consultant. I get that people sometimes think you already know this and you're just having somebody from the outside tell you something you already know. My experience tells me that's not always the case. Sometimes those consultants come and tell you what your staff told you already, but most of the time it's not the reason that you hired the consultant to begin with.
Yeah, another example we did recently was a salary study where we hadn't looked at our salaries compared to the rest of the Midwest for some time. We didn't have the bandwidth to do that, and also there are people who, that's their job. They've done that, and they have all the data, and they can help us. Or run the city survey. Now, maybe one day we'll do that ourselves, but right now, I bring those people in. It's a good question. It's a very small piece of the city budget that gets used in consultants, but it's always good to evaluate it.
Mm-hmm. So let's see. Joel has one more question, and we're interested in your input. He claims that we ignore public input, and uses this example, saying a high percentage of us did not want the tax increase for a convention center, yet our elected officials ignored us and pushed it through. So.
Well, thank you, Joel. I think that is the way democracy works. That was a vote of the county council. I don't know that a high percentage opposed it for a long time. People have been interested in looking at how to finance the expansion of the convention center. We are a very unusual city in our makeup that we did not have a food and beverage tax like many places around the state in the region to do that. But ultimately, that is a vote of democratically elected representatives who voted to put that in place. I don't think they ignored input. They just may not have agreed with you, Joel, but they agreed with others, and keep that input coming.
Yeah, it's important. It's an important piece. I'm thinking that we can talk about the parks budget 2017. That shows us a lot of interesting things, and it's very metrics driven. We'll put it that way, in terms of pools and lessons and that sort of thing. This, Mick, is your area of expertise, so maybe you can guide us.
Well, we'll point folks to the Aquatic Goals in this particular slide, and it talks about how many patrons we'd like to see participate in swimming activities at our two pools, Bryan Park and Mills Pool. And while the goal was 55,000 at Bryan and 21,000 at Mills, it was not quite obtained. Now that can be for a variety of factors. Weather usually is the main one. If the pool's closed, then you're going to have lost. You'll never get that day back. As they say, when an airplane takes off, you'll never get those seats back. It's lost revenue, and for the aquatics division, it could have been weather driven that they didn't attain those numbers, but they got close, and that's an example of using the term substantially accomplished when you reach more than 50% of your goal, versus some of the others where there were private rentals at the pool that exceeded the goal of 30. It was 32, so that goal was accomplished. And again, this department does have a long history of using metric-driven goals. It's a big reason why they use the life cycle analysis. If I'd have thought of this example earlier when the mayor asked, a good one is adult softball participation. In its heyday in the 90s, there were 5,000 players and 400 teams playing adult softball. Today, there's less than 200 teams and about 2,000 players. So that just means you shift your resource allocation to other things. What has trended? Youth soccer has gone up as a participatory sport. Girls basket softball has gone up, and other things have displaced that. particular activity, and the park staff has adjusted resource allocation accordingly. So that's how these are really helpful in utilizing the data to shift where you spend your resources.
And obviously, this shows 1 year, but we care a lot about those trends, as you talked about. You know, if there are 39,000 patrons at Bryant Park Pool, how's that trended over the last 5 years? Where do we see it going? How do we want to respond to that? But there's a lot of detail in this, and this helps you see. It also helps you see how much are we spending with the activity-based budgeting. Well, how much, if you have this many softball players, what's the budget for softball? And compare that to soccer, to ice hockey, to swim lessons, etc.
That's right, and we'll get in, as we continue our budget development process into the next cycle, beyond 19 into 2020, that'll be the next iteration, is really getting down into the how much is it costing per experience, per participation, per lane mile, per ton of trash we pick up, to try to measure those over time, build the baseline data, and then make hopefully smart decisions about how to allocate resources in the future.
Well, if I'm reading this document accurately, it looks like ice skating is really on the rise here in Bloomington. All of the skating goals for 2017 were surpassed, it looks like. Group skating lessons to over 600 participants, that was the goal. We achieved 617. Now this is quite an impressive surpassing of goal. The goal was to make available public skating for community members for at least 300 hours seasonally. We had 525 hours of public sessions. So I think if I were a sociologist, I would have something to say about ice skating in South Central Indiana. So it is interesting to see what we can learn from the goals accomplished and those that were not quite accomplished, but tell us things nonetheless.
And we tried to make it pretty simple color coding. Green means good, accomplished. Yellow means substantially accomplished. Pink means it wasn't met. And that helps us look at it, helps the public see it easily and quickly. And again, the budgets can be dry and detailed and deep and sleep-inducing sometimes when you try to go them, but we hope, go into them, we hope this helps people dig in and really encourage you to look at this and find areas that are interesting to you. You have comments, we welcome them. The City Council, we hope, will review this as well.
Might be helpful to tell the public about the sort of budget basic development time frame. It's quite intensive. Back in March of a given year, the city is on a calendar year budget, so January 1 to December 31. So in March, just 3 months into a new year, you're budgeting for the next year. You begin the process. We don't really get revenue estimates from the state, which is the entity that tells us about property tax revenues, local income tax revenues. We estimate our own revenues from certain services we provide. So you really don't get that until July. So a lot of this goal setting process is the very beginning stage of that, looking back at trends, looking at data we have, and then starting to write goals for the next year through our strategic plan and through use of our surveys. By August, we're presenting to the council. So we've had to take all the 15 or so departments' numbers that they've sent into us, and we have to do the harsh reality of, they ask for this, it's always more than we have, and we have to find where the priorities are. And again, the public drives a lot of the priorities of where we're going to spend our dollars. Of course, we repeat things every year, and we're always going to do some of those things, but then there's discretionary new project, new money, opportunities, maybe not new money, but new priorities that are set by the administration with feedback from the public. All that gets put into the washing machine of budget development, and the mayor has to present it to the council, and the council has to approve it. Multiple hours of presentations, if you've watched any of them, 5 and 6 hours a night for 4 straight nights, lead to then some post-presentation discussions about things that the council might like.
That's where we are right now.
That's where we are in that process right now. We'll present those changes to the budget on Wednesday night, the 26th, and then the council will have 2 more weeks before they take their final vote October 10th. Then it goes to the State Department of Local Government Finance, and they have to sign off and make sure that everything we said in revenue matches up to what we're going to expend. You can't run a budget into the red. So all those steps take 6 to 8 months before a new budget year actually starts, which is January 1 for this particular budget cycle 19.
Worth noting, we do pass a budget on time, unlike some of our governments, and 2, we do have a balanced budget, unlike some of our governments.
And a healthy reserve.
And a healthy reserve, too. So Anyway, I know we don't have a lot of time, I don't think,
That's
do we?
right.
Are we wrapping up? Or
Well, we should,
have-
and we apologize for technical difficulties at the
We
start.
started,
Yeah, and it's important to reiterate that, yeah, we're talking about the 2017 budget, and which has obviously been resolved. We're in the process of approving the 2019 budget. Hope everyone comes in and participates Wednesday to listen to that, those deliberations, and then October 10th, that will be the final vote on the 2019. But so we thought it would be instructive at this juncture to reflect on where we've come from, and to see, okay, how are we setting goals now? How is it differently? What have we learned from the past? And we wanted to share that with you. So go ahead and check out the 2017 budget, goals and accomplishments, that document available to you, the same document we're looking at right here at bloomington.in.gov/city/budget, and by tomorrow we should have the 2018 document up there.
And that'll be halfway through, updated through June 30th of 18. And just one more important point to note, this downloadable format you see that's going to be online is just a summary of all that's in the actual management tool called Trello. That's way more robust and has a lot more checklists and dates and times on it.
Used for management, really.
Used for management as an internal document. This is just, so if somebody says, well, that's not very robust, you're really not impressing me with that. Remember, this is just a downloadable piece that
Right.
synopsis sort of crystallizes what's been accomplished so far, what hasn't been as well.
Right, so that process you were talking about earlier that starts way back in the beginning of the year, that's all happening in Trello. This is the report out of
That's
Trello,
right.
basically. Yeah, well, so we hope that folks are still listening, and that you haven't actually taken your midday siesta during this conversation. We know that budget, sometimes even the word can be kind of yawn-inducing, but underneath it is this really interesting discussion of city activities and goals. I mean, there's a reason why we're having this discussion today, Mayor. I think it speaks to your values and your goals for government.
Well, I appreciate everybody's attention. Knowing what your money is being spent on and how well it's being used is important to you, it's important to me. I want to say how proud I am of the 700 employees who are doing all this work and getting this done, and it's kind of putting them out there too to see, well, how they do on paving streets and filling potholes and getting animals adopted and, you know, giving swim lessons and all the things we do every day, responding to emergencies and all that stuff. And I want you to thank them if you can too when you see a city employee for all their work on our behalf. And I think this accountability, I said I wanted to open the doors when I got here, and I think this is a big opening of the doors about what's going on in government. So I hope you'll enjoy it and give us feedback.
Well, thanks for joining us today. You can catch this conversation, it'll be archived on our Facebook page. And again, the budget documents are at bloomington.in.gov/city/budget. I'm Yael Cassandra, the city's communications director, along with Morgan Wells, the administrative coordinator, Deputy Mayor Mick Renison, and Bloomington Mayor John Hamilton. Thanks so much.